Welcome everyone to Knox Game Design for October 2023. So this month I'm going to be talking about object-oriented GameMaker. So everybody out there who's like knows how to make a GameMaker game, this may be like the next step into making your games a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, things like that. So why object-oriented? So you can define attributes and functionality that's common between multiple objects in one place, so you don't have to duplicate code, repeat code, which is bad because when you start repeating code, then if you have to change it in one place, then you have to change it in multiple places. So using object-oriented, then you can define things once and then make subclasses, and so you don't have to repeat code and functionality. In GameMaker, they don't call it subclasses. So in a lot of languages such as Java and C# and Ruby and all those good languages, they call them classes. But GameMaker technically doesn't have classes, but you can kind of do things in an object-oriented way. They have parenting. So here's some examples of things that you could define in a parent class, such as health, attack power, like if we're talking about enemies, defense value, and then you can define methods such as take damage, like all enemies have a take damage method. So you can define that in one spot, not have to define it for every single different type of enemy that you have. And in that function, you can pass in a parameter such as how much damage that enemy is taking. As I said, it reduces code duplication, and you can override functions. If you have special cases, then you can override the functionality in the parent. So let me move this magnifier. So I found that this is the best approach in my last game. So I've always done things the wrong way. I've always like duplicated, and I make an enemy, and then I make another enemy, and they're all separate. But the thing to do is create one enemy object, like a superclass, or a parent, as they call it in GameMaker. And as I mentioned, these have the generic attributes for all enemies, attack, defense, things like that. A little bit later on, you might look into things like, hey, is an enemy stunnable or freezable, things like that. Then every enemy would respond to that call a different way. And eventually you can also look at behaviors, a way of having like multiple inheritance, which really isn't supported in GameMaker, but in other languages you have behaviors. So then you can have an enemy type. I'll show a few examples that I came up with, but you can have an overarching type of enemy, the behaviors, how that enemy acts, moves, the AI, things like that. That's what I put here. Attack pattern, default attributes, like the movement, default movement speed, jump height, weight delay. And then I have what's called an enemy rank. So you could have an enemy type, but then have different ranks of that enemy. So one might be a little bit faster, or jump a little bit higher, have a little bit more health, a little bit more defense, things like that. So it has the same overall behavior of that enemy type, but maybe a little bit stronger, and that makes your game a little bit more interesting. That way you can have the same enemy, but have different levels of that enemy. And you see that with a lot of. I'll go over some examples here in a minute, but like in Dragon Warrior for the NES, you have like a wolf, and then you have like a super wolf, and then a mega wolf or whatever, and it's basically the same behavior for all those enemies, but some are just a little bit stronger than other ones. So yeah, I think most of us have played Super Mario Brothers. So I have up here, I think I took that sprite from Galaga, just a generic enemy. This could be an enemy in any game, so you have the health and attributes such as that, is alive, things like that. And then down here you have the different types of enemies. And I'll just show an example of how I broke this one down. There's probably different ways you can do it, but I have what's called a shelled enemy, which is like the Koopa. So I have him grayed out because this parent enemy has multiple subclasses or sub-enemies that inherit from the shelled enemy. So the shelled enemy would have like an is-stompable, or like if you're playing Mario 3, where you can pick up the shell after it's been stomped. So all of these children all inherit that behavior. So you have green Koopa, red Koopa, and then you can even have the Buzzy Beetle, because, I mean, he looks different, but he still inherits that stompable, hide in the shell behavior. And then you have the other enemies, Hammer Brother, Lakitu, Goomba, and the Cheep Cheeps. They're all kind of the same in the original Super Mario Brothers. But if you wanted to, you could have one a little bit more powerful. Or I guess in Super Mario 3, you have a Hammer Bro that can shoot fireballs, and so it has the same same behavior as a Hammer Brother, but he does something a little bit different. So, and I also mentioned the Paratroopa down here, so it is also a shelled enemy. He just has wings, so that winged property would be an add-on for that subclass. Looking at Legend of Zelda, so we have like the same generic enemy, health, attack, and defense, and I broke this out into 4 different enemies down here. These aren't all the enemies in original Legend of Zelda, but just for example. So we have like an Octorok. All the Octoroks move, wait, then move in a different direction. They have a default speed. And so I just have some examples. I don't think these are exact. I just kind of guessed at some of these values, so these values may not be exact. But I just put like speed 1, health 1 for the red Octorok, speed 2, health 2 for the blue, and then the blue can shoot. I think the red can also shoot, but in this example, we're saying, hey, the blue can shoot, and the red doesn't shoot. You have a Moblin. The blue one's a little bit more powerful, so you have the generic Moblin with his movement pattern. I think he shoots arrows, and then you break that down into 2 subclasses or 2 children objects. The Dark Nut, the same thing. You have the generic Dark Nut up here. The only way you can damage him is by stabbing him from behind. So you have the red and the blue. So one has the blue has a little bit more health, or I think double the health. I think that might actually be 4 health for the red or orange and 8 for the blue. And then tech types. They all kind of jump in the same pattern, like a spider. So you have a red one and a blue one. Maybe the blue one jumps twice as high. So you'll have the generic attributes in the superclass and the parent object, and then you can modify the different ranks or instances in the subclasses or sub-objects. And I was just showing here, this can also be applied to weapons or items, not just enemies. So you have like a boomerang in Zelda. So a boomerang has like a default velocity, a state, whether it's departing or returning back to the player, depart time, how long it's going to go out, then the current depart time, how long it's been going out. So you can have like a wooden boomerang or whatever it's called, and it would have a depart time 2 before it starts coming back. And then you could have a magical boomerang with the default depart time of 4, so it goes twice as far. But you're still going to have the base code for a boomerang defined in the boomerang parent, and you'll just modify that departure time for each of the 2 instances, each of the 2 children. And that way you're not rewriting all the boomerang code over again. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about in GameMaker. So you just go down, and under your object you have parent. You can see here I have the object enemy class up here, and then I have a specific instance of this enemy called enemy 02, the green one. So basically, yeah, so the object enemy has the health and all that good stuff. And in this example, I defined all the attributes of this type of enemy in the subclass, as you can see here. Then I cleaned it up later to do it the right way. But here's an example, and I'll show it in GameMaker here in a second. But you can see here where I have all these children of the object enemy. So you can click on object enemy. Then if you click on, you can click on parent, I think, and you can see all the children of this object. So in the object enemy, you can see where I defined, let me pull my magnifier over. So it has a health of 1, an attack of 1, an invincible delay. So if an enemy is attacked, then it's going to have a little bit of recovery period. That way, whenever your weapon collides with the enemy, it's not continually colliding. It's got like a little period, wait period, to be able to be damaged again. Then I have something called a bonus. With this game, you're getting time back for every enemy that you defeated. But this could also be like rupees or hearts, so you could have like a default item that it drops. And here's something that I learned. I didn't know this until like a few weeks ago. But you can define functions. And this was driving me up it's always driven me up the wall about GameMaker. I never thought there was a way to define custom functions. But you can do like this function called do damage, then do equal sign, then function, and then within parens, your parameter, then open brace and close brace, and then you can put all your logic in there. And I also found out you can also define this in a different syntax as function, then space do damage, then the parameter. I think that's the way I started doing it after, because I don't know if there's a difference between those two ways, but I think the function, then the function name after looks a little bit cleaner to me. But this was the first way that I found out how to do it. So this is default do damage, so it's just going to subtract off the damage value from the health and give the enemy a little bit of an invincible delay. Then if the health after being hit is greater than 0, we're going to play the sound enemy hit. And if the health is 0 or less, then we're going to play the enemy dead sound. So here's how you inherit. So you create, you take your child object, and then you tell it its parent is the object enemy, and then you can go and create. And over here, what you do is you call event inherited. So this is kind of like calling, I think, super in Java or base in C#. So that's going to, and I know like in a lot of object-oriented languages like Java, it implicitly calls super for you when you implement this method in the subclass. But if you don't have event inherited, then it won't call the superclass or the parent create method. And it took me a little bit while to figure that out, because I created the child object to start out with. I was like, hey, why isn't it inheriting all the values of the parent? Well, you got to explicitly call event inherited. Then you can override any of the values of the parent. So if object enemy has a health of 1, you can define it as 2. All the custom values in here. So you can either override or create new values. I'm not sure about this, but I think if you call event inherited at the end, then these values won't get implied. So it's like you're setting these values, then it calls the parent object. So you got to be careful where you place event inherited. So to override a function, you just define it in the subclass, and then you put the overriding code. So this was an enemy with children, so it checks to see and the enemy can only be damaged if you defeat all the children enemy first. So in that case, we overrode the do damage function in the child enemy object for its specific code. Now I don't know if there's a way to call like super after here. Call the superclass do damage. I'm not sure. But the reason you want to do this is because if you have like a weapon and the weapon calls do damage, then you don't want to have to it makes it a lot cleaner if you just call it on the enemy object. It's kind of like casting it all as an enemy object. Then it all kind of figures itself out. When you call do damage on the enemy, then it calls the subclass's do damage method and not the superclass or the parent. I always say superclass because that's how I was introduced to object-oriented. It's kind of the parent equals superclass, basically, from my understanding. Yeah, so that's it. What else? So in GameMaker, there's no multiple inheritance, as I alluded to earlier. Some game development environments, I know Stencil, I believe, does it. Maybe some other ones, but you have behaviors, and that's kind of like a multiple inheritance. So you'd create an enemy, and you'd like add a jump behavior or a move and wait behavior. And I think that's a little bit cleaner way of doing things. So I don't think GameMaker, I mean, you could probably come up with a way to do that. You probably create one like enemy class and define all these different attributes, and you could probably just select which of those behaviors you want the enemy to use. I really haven't worked with that. I just know it like in Stencil, it comes by default. You can drag in the enemy's behaviors, and the point is that's a way of doing multiple inheritance, so you can have behaviors from that you add to enemies. You just got to make sure that these behaviors don't conflict, because you don't want an enemy like jumping and shooting at the same time, or there's ways that variables can interact with things in the wrong way. So you just got to be aware of that. Yeah, so that's what I mentioned here. Yeah, stompable enemy, walking enemy, jumping enemy, shooting. So you don't want an enemy walking and jumping at the same time. That'd be kind of strange. So you just got to watch out for that. Yeah, so that allows you to assign multiple behaviors to an enemy type. So here's GameMaker back here. So yeah, if you look over here, just recently, so here's my object enemy right here. So you see the object enemy has no sprite at all, and the sprite is what it uses to determine collision boxes and things like that. But as long as you define the sprite in the subclass, here's a collision mask right here, then you're okay. It's just got to be defined somewhere. But yeah, as I mentioned, here's a create method here. I showed this on the slide with our default health attack bonus, take damage. So yeah, I changed it here to function, take damage. And then I have it set knockback. So what I did here, so whenever the player's sword collides with the enemy, then it's going to give the enemy a negative velocity. And I track the knockback velocity separate from the enemy's, whatever the enemy's current velocity. But the thing is like, yeah, all enemies are going to inherit this, but if you have an enemy that doesn't get knocked back, like a boss, then you can override set knockback in the subclass. That's just a design decision I made. You could define knockback in every single enemy subclass if you wanted to, but it seems like it's simpler to do it this way because most enemies can be knocked back. So as you see here, I have all the enemies, most of the enemies defined in as children, but then I went back and defined this object enemy 01. That's the first enemy that I created. And then I have subclasses of so object enemy 01. Again, there's no sprite in here, but this has like the default attributes for this enemy. This is kind of like an Octorok and Legend of Zelda. They just move, wait, pick a new direction, move again. And oh, by the way, as I started working on this game a little bit more, I decided using kind of like a Playmaker approach, Playmaker from Unity, have everything defined in states. If you don't have states, things get really messy. So for this enemy, it's easier to have a state moving and a state waiting. So it just alternates or goes between those two states. And I have a state variable, which is just an integer, and I define some constants. I can't remember if you can do enums in GameMaker. I think you can. I just define them as integers. So I have a state waiting, state moving, and state stun. So basically it loops through between waiting and moving, and depending on what state it is, it calls either... I think there's a method in here. Yeah, do moving. There should be like a do waiting. But, and then like a start moving and start waiting. So whenever you enter this state, these get called. Whenever you're actively in the state, you do moving or do waiting. I guess I don't have a do waiting. But that's kind of the approach that I took to doing this. And I could probably do a whole nother talk just on. And what these are called is finite state autonoma, deterministic finite autonoma. They go by different names. But it makes things a little bit cleaner. Otherwise, you're going to have like all these little countdown timers. And you're going to say, oh, is it the wait timer? Is it the default timer? So it's easier just to have one state. So here's this step right here. So I have just one switch statement. So it's going to switch on the state. If it's in state waiting, then we're going to subtract from the delay. Then after the delay gets to 0, then we're going to start state moving. That moves it into the moving state. If it's in the moving state, we're going to do moving. Then we're going to subtract off the delay. Once the delay gets down to 0, then we're going to go into the start state waiting. And then if the enemy's weapon collides with the enemy, then we got a special state called state stun, which is basically makes the enemy not move at all. And there's like a delay. Then after that reaches 0, then we're going to start moving again. So yeah, this makes things a lot cleaner, just like with the 3 states here, not having a bunch of timers and all this. So whenever we go to a new state, that delay timer just gets reset. So you just have one delay timer that moves it between these 2 states, the waiting and moving state. And then if there's a collision between the weapon and the enemy, then it goes directly to the state stunned. So this enemy has 3 different states here. So that's just in the object enemy, which if you instantiated this enemy, this object enemy 01, it wouldn't do anything at all. So that's why I have these children. So I have a enemy 1, and I kind of cleaned it up here in the hierarchy. You can create a group. So I grouped these 3 enemies under the OBJ enemy 01. That way you can like hide them and pop them out like that. Makes things a little bit cleaner so you can hide things and find things without going through a million enemies down here in your list. So the weakest one is object. So I use green as weak, blue as medium, red as most difficult for the ranks. So if you look at object enemy 01, he does have a sprite. I guess the one thing you could do, you could define the sprite in the parent, and then define a color and use some stuff with the sprite coloring. But it's easier just to create different sprites for everything and just color them yourself. So in the object enemy 01 green, we have the speed of 1, bonus 1, then the wait time values for moving and waiting. And in step, we don't even do anything in step. This is the whole subclass right here, just changing these values. So if we look at enemy blue, same thing going on here. He has a little bit more health, a little bit more attack, bigger bonus, same speed, smaller wait times, and then step, nothing. We just call object. I don't even think I need step here. I could probably delete it, and it'd probably still work. And then we have the blue color sprite for the blue enemy. And then for the red one, then he's got even more health, bigger bonus, faster speed, and a little bit longer wait time. I changed the wait time. I reduced the wait time and increased the move time. So here we got this is the game right here. So yeah, we got 3 different enemies. You see this one has a little bit more health. He gets knocked back. So yeah, the green ones go down in 1 hit, the blue ones take 2 hits, and then the red one takes 4 hits. And he gives a bigger bonus. So to the player, it looks like it's 3 totally different enemies, but we define that 1 enemy type and find 3 children, and just with these values and changing the sprite, it kind of looks like a different enemy. It's just a different rank of an enemy. So I think that makes your game a lot more interesting because you got different types of enemy, and you're not doing a lot of extra work to get those additional enemies. But if you see a lot of games, at least the games that I see, you just have 1 enemy and 1 behavior and on 1 level. A lot of the old NES games, you saw this a lot with the older games where you can take one set of behaviors and then just make some slight changes and make it look like completely different levels of enemies. So I kind of miss those days. where you'd have the different levels and things like that. But yeah, that's basically it. Hope everybody learned something and hopefully make your GameMaker games a little bit better without doing too much extra work. So Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up for October 2023. Appreciate everyone out there listening and watching.